Analytics. This is what we consider the free consulting segment of our webinar, Open Access to Gurus Scott and Scott. And we do have great questions coming in now, just a few, but there's room for a few more if you're willing to stick around to about a quarter after, 20 after. So just enter your questions into the text field of the webinar panel, and I'll be pleased to read them aloud for Scott, or myself to respond. Let's start with a fairly popular one. Nick asks, will the presentation and slides be available for download during or after the presentation? I know that's a very popular thing to do with webinars. The only reason we don't is that we like to encourage live participation for the polling and the Q&A. And since we produce this monthly, we invite you to go to our webinar page, the-modeling-agency.com/data-mining-webinar. And you can sign up for a future event. They're all slightly different, particularly when we get into the dynamic parts of the presentation. And join us again. The next one, I think, is on September 11th. Tom asks, great question here, what's the best way to measure predictive accuracy? And based upon the two segments, the two main segments by Scott Terry and Tony Rathburn, I think you'd see two different answers to this, but I think they'll both concur that there's one primary right answer. And what I'm leading up on is that I think the best way, there's two ways looking at accuracy. One is what we consider artificial metrics. You know, how technically accurate, how low is the error of the model that we're looking at? What's the R squared, in other words? But on a bigger level, I think we want to look at the business metrics. How closely are we able to address the business question and impact the metrics that we establish at the start of the project? And that's where I think Scott, as much as his session was focused on the technical metrics, I think both would agree that it doesn't matter how accurate, technically accurate your model is, if you're missing the mark on addressing the business metrics. So with that set up, let me start with Scott Terry and say, you know, address either of those in the best way to measure predictive accuracy from your experience.
Well, honest to goodness, couldn't improve on what you just said. I mean, just to reemphasize, there are the model performance metrics, which we usually look at from a best practices perspective as a model training, a model testing, and a model validation type scenario. If the model doesn't validate, then you need to go back to the drawing board. You know, and that's beyond the statistics that are associated with the model. And of course, even that's not adequate if it doesn't meet the objectives that you've laid down at the beginning of the project.
Fantastic. Scott Clendaniel, would you like to extend?
Oh, sure. Statisticians and data miners, unfortunately, as a group, are very much like economists. Put any two of us in a room and we'll come up with more than three opinions. But I would say that, again, starting from the business objective, that's what you're after. There are lots of ways to measure different types of accuracy. If you need a specific guideline that I use a lot in the past, it's determining the threshold that we have to use and then looking at the area under the lip curve. If that means absolutely nothing to you, good for you, because it shouldn't at this point. I think folks get too wrapped up in that in the beginning, and also you got to figure out what outcome do you need. If lives are at stake, you need to have a higher level of accuracy than how many direct mail pieces you're going to send out. So, but we would be happy to, in the course, help you work through your specific issue, I think.
Absolutely. Fantastic. And both of those are addressed in those two different ways. You know, the technical accuracy, making sure that we arrive at valid models, as Scott Terry mentioned, and then in the second course, our focus is on ensuring that the business metrics are well defined and translated in ways that leadership will appreciate. Thank you both. Chad asks, how can I best show visual data for executives with no data visualization experience? Let's hit this one briefly because this really hits to the edge of analytics here. But it is important that we roll the results up in terms, again, that leadership will appreciate. I would imagine one way is to roll up the results into some kind of basic dashboarding for the executive team. Scott Clendaniel, I know you have a good bit of experience with visualization of data. Let's go with you first this time. What could you say to Chad?
Sure. The way that I have found most successful is to ask the executive what they're most comfortable with and what they've used in the past.
That one. What do they want? Yeah, good point.
Because you never know, and a lot of times I've been in organizations where people will say things like, got to use pie charts. Executive X loves pie charts. Everything has to be pie charts. And then you'll actually ask Executive X, and they'll say, whatever you do, please don't give me any more pie charts, because that's all I see all day long. That's the first issue. And then the second issue is, think of the story you're trying to tell. What are you trying to make the executive understand? And then there are different ways to figure out which type of visualization works best. One of the challenges with the dashboarding world is that people have come up with a process of sticking every possible number on the dashboard with different speedometer and gauges and all types of stuff, which defeats the whole purpose of the dashboard in the first place.
That is phenomenal. And you know, I tell people all the time that are looking to get into predictive analytics that don't just rush to get at the data in the software. The strategic exercises, the project design is so important to understand what the questions really are and how to ensure that the resources support the stated objectives. And many think that it's kind of trite. Well, I know to do that. And here, when I asked the question of you, Scott, I didn't even think to ask leadership on for visualization, and it's the biggest key to the whole thing. How do they want to interpret this? How are they used to seeing reports, and what do they need to get from the data? So that was the key thing that you hit upon there. And look how I just quickly overlooked it. And the majority of those who approach predictive analytics problems, what hopefully they're learning from this event is that the majority of the pitfalls that plague predictive analytics problems are not tactical; they're strategic. It's not somebody that lacks mathematical capability. It's really the soft side of analytics, getting the practitioner to communicate effectively to leadership, and for leadership to pose the question in the way that establishes a valid analytic target. Scott Terry, would you like to extend that question on data visualization?
Sure. I think when I hear a question like that, it's a pretty broad question, and it's much like getting asked the question, how much does a car cost? We probably need to narrow it down a little bit. Scott Clendaniel came up with a absolutely valid, perfect way if your audience is known. But in general, from a very high level, within my experience, whenever I'm presenting graphics or whenever I'm talking to an audience that is mixed or unknown, I do the simple thing. I present them with both. I give them a numeric summary and I give them a visual summary that's side by side. There are some people that respond better to graphics, and certainly in some situations, such as when you're talking about outliers, graphics are much more powerful and concise and simpler in terms of being able to identify outliers. But some people also respond to numbers. So when possible, and I'm dealing with an audience that is mixed and unknown, I try to present both.
That's great. And then, yeah, you've got both bases covered for the, I guess what they call the blue people or the red people, right? They can either go after the numbers or the illustrations. That's great. Great advice. A few questions here. We had a few people leave. We still have more than half with us at almost 10 minutes after the hour. Hassan asks, a two-part question. Do you provide descriptive analysis? Yes, I'll have Scott and Scott address that. What do you do if you have the data, but you don't know where to start? You probably saw the process model that we had earlier in the presentation. I think Scott Terry had it first presented it in his segment. The cross-industry standard process for data mining. The first two phases are business understanding and data understanding. Those steps, they're all public domain. You can actually, it's available at our website. It's actually going to be a link that you'll receive after the event. It's about an 80-page guide, and it has every detailed step that you'll take in those first 2 stages. Those are the important strategic stages that really set up your project design. Those are the ones that will have the considerations for your entire project team, from leadership to user to IT, to pose those questions and start to populate your project plan. From that, you're going to then understand how to evaluate your data, and you'll come up with kind of a grid of potential projects and how to prioritize them. They'll naturally come together, and the 2 should be looked at, in consideration of the other. It's a brilliant process model. It's not all that new, but it was great from the start. We make some minor modifications to it, but it's the one that works the best. And those who start on Chapter 5 with the data and the software are going to pay for that later, because they're not going to have the framework from which to understand how to evaluate the model, how to make sure it fits the environment, how users are going to adopt it, how leadership is going to understand it, how it's going to be purposeful and residual and impactful. Those don't come together unless you do those first 2 stages, but those are the ones that will give you the compass to go forward. Let's start this time with Scott Terry. Do you have any other advice for Hassan if you have the data but you don't know where to start?
Well, very simply, to summarize everything, you start with a problem. You don't start with software. You don't start with algorithms. You don't start with descriptive statistics. The whole purpose of predictive analytics is problem solving. So if there's no problem to be solved, then you really don't have a challenge to tackle with predictive analytics. Fortunately, within most organizations, you are in a situation where problems abound. So as we talked about in my session, predictive analytics is a diagnostic and a prescriptive process. So the first step you start is not with software, not with data, but framing a problem, defining a problem that can be addressed by predictive analytics.
Phenomenal. Here you, people see you as the tactical instructor, right? Where do you get all this strategic view, Scott?
Well, I see them as inseparable.
Yeah.
Tony is incredibly adept at teaching the tactical. I also teach the strategic, as you know. Yep. The 2 are part and parcel of the same. They're not, even though we teach them separately, they're both critical. You
right.
Can't have one without the other.
Absolutely. And I'm being facetious because at the beginning of the event I said, you both have, including Scott Clandaniel, extensive experience at the expert level in both the tactical and the strategic. It's just who teaches which one. And by all means, that's your experience there is apparent, and phenomenal advice. And Scott Clandaniel actually applauded you here in text as well. And let's move over to you, Scott. Anything you'd like to add about getting your compass when you've got the data but not sure where to chart your course?
I think Scott Terry gave a far better answer than I would come up with, to be honest with you. But the other thing I'll just throw in addition to that is one of the big challenges with starting out with data mining projects is that people try to boil the ocean or solve the most complex problems in the world. So I would suggest that you start with something that's relatively easy to solve, and as Tony mentioned earlier, that has a lower chance for failure. If you start off with the first project with something overly difficult and you fall flat on your face, what happens in organizations is they start to believe that data mining just plain doesn't work for anything, and that is not where you want to be.
No, that's absolutely great advice. And I just realized I'm being unfair here. I'm reading the questions. I get first response every time, and you guys are either left to pick up what remains or
yeah, we noticed that, Eric. We wanted to say something about that.
Diplomatically adjust what I may have botched, but thanks for your patience on that, and certainly for me to realize what I've been doing here. Not kind of me. So I will refrain entirely for the next question. I've got questions from Manish, Galen, Belinda. Let me look at the panel here, and Wendy. We'll try to get to the 4 of these. We'll pick up the pace a little bit. And so let's start with Manish. And Scott Clandaniel, your turn to go first this time, and I will refrain. Manish asks, how many months of past data should we consider for, for data preparation for a churn prediction problem. Pretty specific question. You can go to whatever depth you'd like there, but I guess we do have to watch the clock. How much past data should we consider when preparing data for a churn prediction problem?
The answer is at least 50% more than the average amount of time that it takes for somebody to churn.
Oh.
How was that for
That's
brief?
succinct. Brief and succinct. Phenomenal. I hope we say that one more time because people want to write that down.
Oh dear. I got to remember it now? Okay. You want at least, if you're looking at the number of months, you want at least 50% more than the number of months that it takes the average churned individual to churn. So if they stay on the books on average, let's say 7 months, you want at least 50% more than that, so almost 11 months.
Fantastic. Makes sense. Thank you, Scott C. And Scott Terry, would you like to address?
I think that's a great answer. I would expand on it just a little bit and say one of the first things you need to do is you need to define what churn is. Churn can come by a number of different means. Somebody can move out of your area. Somebody can die. The whole idea of attrition and churn modeling got its big thrust when we're dealing with contractual types of obligations, such as cellular phone services or contract types of products and services that one acquires. In that case, it's easier to predict when, or to know when somebody might be susceptible to churn if they sign 1 or 2 year contracts. On the other hand, attrition modeling is starting to, I'm starting to do more models in the retail space. And in retail, it's pretty hard to determine when somebody has actually churned. The fact that they may have not shopped with you in the last 5 or 6 months does not mean that they're not going to shop with you in the future. So in the problem definition phase of your modeling project, you need to get with all the people, the stakeholders who are involved, and come up with what churn actually is. What is a reasonable definition of churn? And fortunately, you've got data that you can analyze ahead of time to give you some kind of indication. Usually that's a segmented type of thing. Different, you've got one-time buyers, you've got people who are low-frequency shoppers, and then you've got your high-frequency shoppers. So you have to consider all those dynamics when you come up with that definition of what churn actually is.
Another strategic consideration from Scott Terry. That's phenomenal. As much as I just want to jump into the data and start swimming around. What a bummer. But no, that's highly critical, and thanks so much for that, Scott Terry. Let me address one very quickly for Belinda. I'm seeking a predictive analytics course for my staff with Greenbelts. Any suggestions? Belinda, if I could take that one offline with you, I don't want to seem too promotional, even on a free webinar, and at the same time would want to ask you some other questions that would help to target the right nature of training for the Greenbelts. And I'm happy to discuss that in the context of other events, the capabilities, limitations of each. And I do have your email. I'll send you a note and see if we can engage in that offline, because it would be specific to the experience of your staff, their objectives, and the like. But thanks for the inquiry. Galen asks, what's essential for an analyst to know and to bring to the table when it comes to data mining and predictive analytics? I can spend 3 minutes at least on that, but I will refrain and take my turn. And this time, let's start with Scott Terry.
Boy, that's another broad question.
Yeah.
Certainly an educational background from a high level, and of course, predictive analytics is a rapidly expanding career. So there's many factions within that. If you're going to get into the medical industry, excuse me, if you're going to get into engineering and robotics, if you're going to get into people kind of stuff, as Tony was talking about. But an appropriate baseline of education is pretty much a requisite these days. Lots of schools and universities, of course, the modeling agency offers some courses. But beyond that, there's no substitute for real-world experience. I consider academic credentials a door opener, You really don't learn until you get your hands dirty and you get some projects under your belt. So get a good education, get your foot in the door, and start working on projects.
Very good. Scott and Scott Clendaniel, would you like to extend?
Only that there's a difference between the requirements to be able to come up with a quality predictive model versus being able to be hired for a full-time position doing a predictive model. And I've worked with a lot of folks with, high school education. I had one individual who didn't know how to operate a calculator, and we were able to get them to the point of being able to come up with a reasonably robust model. I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely, and see, I waited my turn. I'll make sure to go last more often. And great considerations. And let me make sure we still have, Wendy, we're going to get to your question next. Thanks for hanging with us. One thing I would that I've recognized is that it's not necessarily, and like you said, Scott Clendaniel, how much technical experience you necessarily have, but as Scott Terry said, it's the experience from which you can draw. And in that context, I would say that most organizations don't need to go out and add a bench of PhDs or senior level mathematicians or statisticians to their bench in order to succeed at predictive analytics and data mining. Modern software handles much of the automation of the sophisticated mathematics that are required and can build with very little technical background or mathematical background more than adequate models as long as they're applied properly. So I think business acumen is much more important than technical experience, that we have very good models applied the right way than excellent models that are completely misapplied. And in that context, I've seen some PhDs that have failed at the project level even though they developed superior models that were, again, very technically accurate. And business practitioners who maybe didn't build as accurate a model, but at least it was aimed in the right direction and applied properly and fit the environment and was well adopted. And I think that's where there's so much more credit. So for an organization looking at establishing an internal practice, having a senior level mentor to help with the comprehensive assessment, the resulting project design, and to establish the roadmap from which their existing practitioners can take over on the resulting process is really the best way to stand that up without, again, having to expand your payroll with advanced statisticians. So that's my take on the question. And let's see who we have left here. Oh, Wendy, I promised you next. Thanks for your patience. Wendy's still with us. Thanks so much. For social media prediction, most time deals with multiple KPI analysis. What's the best way to measure multiple variates in prediction modeling? Wow, that's fairly technical. I babbled so long I can't remember who went first on the last question. Let me throw it up. And Scott, whoever went last goes first this time, if you recall. For social media prediction, most time that we deal with multiple KPI analysis, what's the best way to measure multiple variates in prediction modeling? Did Scott Clendaniel go first last time?
Well, I can go ahead and jump in if you'd like.
Yeah, please, Scott. Yep.
That is not a simple question to answer on a conference type situation. It depends upon what you're actually modeling. Again, we're going back to the strategic. It depends upon what your objective is and the prescription that you've written for it. Based upon different approaches, there are different ways to analyze variance. So I can't give you a pat, follow this formula type of answer to that kind of question because it's an extremely complex kind of question. For example, are you only using text analytics as your data, or are you integrating it with other data? Depending upon how you do that and the particular algorithmic prescription that you've written, the possibilities are pretty wide, and it's just not a simple answer.
Good point.
It's based upon the limitations of the prescription that you've written.
Absolutely, and that's a valid answer as much as, seasoned consultants like to say it depends, but it really does. It truly does. Scott Clendaniel, would you like to extend?
I was a little puzzled by the question only because it goes back to something that Scott Terry did a brilliant job of explaining early on. What is the problem you're trying to solve with this? I'll tell you one of the things to watch out for, which is the fact, especially in regard to social media, part of the challenge is you can't swing a dead cat without hitting the next hot KPI to follow. And if you try and follow or maximize against all of them, that is a recipe for disaster. So again, what is the business objective? What are you trying to do with social media? What are you trying to measure within social media? And then we can help you pick which elements to use.
Absolutely, and that goes with software as well. There was another question around software, and I think the same considerations apply when it comes to choosing software. And we also have to assume that they are, on phase 3 or 4 of CRISP, and they've already accomplished 1 and 2. And if they have, then the pool of software candidates quickly reduces as well. So at 25 minutes after the hour, I think we got to most of the questions. There's just a few remaining. We'll try to get to those by email. But at 25 minutes after the hour, we're going to draw this event to a close. I'd like to certainly thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Tony, Scott, and Scott for your great segments and, of course, your valuable and sometimes entertaining Q&A contributions. We'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. And from there, we'll hope you'll offer permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter and consider joining us at a public training event soon. Now, recall that the DC class is nearly full. It starts later next month. And with just 4 seats remaining, you'll need to move quickly to ensure your space. Thereafter, you can save 20% on your Las Vegas course series registration if you sign up by September 30th. Now, if you would like to benefit from your early efforts, instead of just reducing the bill for your organization, we can hand you up to $200 in Visa gift cards at the course instead for your own personal use. You can select which discount you'd like to receive in the online registration form. And don't forget that your colleagues can join anytime for up to 30% off. Now, if you don't have a training or travel budget but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Wire Support program. Wire Support is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up a Wire Support account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining task you may wish to delegate, and then remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Wire Support description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Tony, Scott, and Scott, thank you again for attending Data Mining Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.